Hi everyone, thanks for your time again this evening, logging on and committing, the guts of 90 minutes to your own development and hopefully the people around you as well by, translating some of the habits and practices that we're going to share tonight. Tonight's topic is really, really important, both in the current environment we live in and also I think into the future it's going to become more and more prevalent. Um, while I was researching, I suppose the key areas for this webinar tonight, it was interesting to see that in America they kind of looked at a scale of people's happiness from the 1930s and 40s compared to 2017 to 2020, and it shows that people were happier in the 1930s overall compared to the current climate, even though we seem to have better resources all around us as regards food, water, technology, access to travel, etc., etc. So it'll be interesting to dive deeper into maybe some of the reasons for that in our workshop tonight and how maybe we can plan ahead to, I suppose, combat that and make sure that our well-being is at the forefront of a lot of our decisions and some of the practices that we can build in on a daily basis to ensure our well-being is our priority and also is improving on a daily basis. Um, during the first lockdown, I suppose I got an opportunity to do a bit more study on this area, and I did a 10-week course with Yale University around the science of well-being. So I'm probably going to present a lot of that 10-week course in a 90-minute window, which is a challenge, but something I'm looking forward to doing and sharing with you. And I suppose Martin Seligman would be the godfather of positive psychology, where rather than studying, I suppose, mental ill health and mental illness and mental disorders, he started to study people who were on the other side of that scale, mentally very healthy, positive, engaged, and experiencing a sense of authentic happiness in their lives. And he's a very good kind of well-being theory put out there at the moment around PERMA. And I'll share the link to you after the webinar of how to maybe access that and kind of visit your kind of score around your own PERMA scale at the moment. But it's the 5 key areas around positive emotions and how we generate them maybe in our daily lives and what generates them for us. It's about engagement. So, finding the activities that hit your sweet spot and you're fully absorbed and in flow and in a healthy level of challenge doing maybe. It's having more authentic relationships in your life and how you can maybe build them as well. And we'll get into that later on. It's finding a meaning in our existence, a meaning in the activities we do, the interactions we have on our daily pursuits. And then that sense of achievement is also an important part. So, achievement for people can come in small things where it's completing a project in work, completing a fitness class or an exercise, preparing a meal for yourself, or something on a bigger scale where you secure a new client maybe on a project for 20,000 or 50,000 or whatever it might be in your domain. So achievement can come in many forms, and we have the power to choose how we interpret our level of achievement on a daily basis and how we can increase our positive emotions from that. So what we'll be kind of covering tonight is these 4 sections, I suppose, the happiness equation and understanding maybe where it comes from, understanding some annoying features of our mind that thwart our happiness on a daily and weekly basis and just become aware of them and maybe how we can change them and rewire them through their brain and our brain patterns, and how we actually build better habits. So we all kind of know what we should be eating. We all kind of know how much sleep we should be getting. We all know that exercise 30 minutes a day is important. We all know that, not working excessively is important. But, why do we know these things and we don't action them? So we're going to look at some of the things that maybe trip us up and some of the new habits we can build to ensure that, like, knowing isn't half the battle. It's actually committing to them emotionally and actually doing them is the key thing. And there'll be very simple practices to do that later on as well. So where does happiness come from? Okay, the research and science would tell us is 50% can be down to our genetic disposition or genetic makeup, which we probably inherited from our family tree and our generations. So 10% of it are down to our current life circumstances, or maybe life circumstances we had throughout our life experiences. And we have 40% is down to our person's thoughts and actions. So the positive thing for me there is that 50% of our happiness we kind of have a fair degree of influence and control over. How I interpret my life circumstances, we can see people in the most impoverished conditions, the poorest countries of the world, and they seem to be the happiest in the world because their interpretation of their life circumstances could be completely different to what we're perceiving them to be. You know, the words we're using to ourselves and the behaviors we kind of cultivate on a daily basis have an influence on our overall happiness. And that's a very positive thing for me, that we can, you know, change our negativity bias and our orientation through negative thinking and negative perspectives and pessimistic outlooks through proper practices around how we're using language, what we're listening to, what we're speaking about, who we're surrounding ourselves with, and what our daily habits are. So there's a lot in our control around our own general happiness and our own well-being that we'll share with you during the course of this evening. So first we need to maybe understand a bit around our brain again, and kind of going back over some things we've covered and some we haven't. And to understand, we suppose we all have this old brain, or the reptilian brain, which is part of our limbic, our emotional system. And for that, at the moment, has I suppose, a threat detector system that is kind of sensing our environment all the time for mostly perceived threats. You know, physical threats in our environment at the moment are probably very little because we're indoors, we're not really traveling anywhere, we're not meeting anyone. So the amount of physical threats we have in our environment is probably limited. Now, you could say the virus is potentially a physical threat to us at the moment, and that's again open to our interpretation and our perception. The biggest thing maybe that triggers people nowadays, I notice working with clients, is probably the mental and emotional threats of, you know, comparison to other people's lives online. Maybe how we're going to be judged or perceived online for posting a comment or a photo or whatever it is for people. So those perceived threats are probably higher, and those perceived stressors are probably higher for people because of our current environment and the technology world we live in. And then the opposite side of that is probably our reward system, which produces hormones like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, which kind of calm us, make us happy, and make us feel more relatable to people and connected with people. And again, if I'm perceiving a situation in my life as an opportunity and a positive challenge and something that there could be a potential reward out of it, I'm starting to fire that neural activity in my brain and in my body, and my biological response is echoing that. So, you know, I start to see something as an opportunity and a possibility and a nice challenge and a nice test. I'm starting to feel maybe a bit excited about it. I'm starting to think of maybe the reward from it, and it's, you know, producing that chemical response of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. And we can, you know, interpret the situations the way we want, and that's an important thing there to mention to you in reference to. And when we fire that, I suppose, emotional response, that increases our motivation to focus in on a task and get it completed. It helps with our decision making and focusing in what needs to be done in that moment. And our behavior replicates that, our body language, our energy, our intention, and our focus. So, you know, it's really important to look at challenges as an opportunity, look at them as a possibility, look for the solution, look for the optimistic outlook and the positive outlook in doing something, and look at maybe what could be a positive outcome out of it and a learning experience from it and a growth moment. And we're not only changing our biology, we're changing our psychology by doing that. And it's natural when we're going into unfamiliar situations that our threat detector is raised, it's hyper vigilant, and it's looking for both physical perceived threats and emotional and mental perceived threats. And sometimes it's just, we need to reorientate that and tell it it's all okay, you're safe and secure here. This is an exciting challenge, you're prepared for it, and I can cope. And that would start to change that emotional response we're having, and obviously our motivation and our decision making subsequently in our behavior. So that's just an important distinction that we have an emotional limbic thinking brain, and we have that prefrontal cortex decision-making brain. And at the base of that emotional brain, it's really strong. It's 5 times stronger than the prefrontal cortex system, is that threat detector. And that usually fire a response early and maybe cause a sense of overwhelm or anxiety or panic. And, what we say to ourselves in that situation will have a big bearing. Another thing I want to bring you awareness to tonight before we kind of get an understanding of areas we want to improve in our own life is around our performance zones. So, why I'm showing you this graph is to realize that sometimes in high pressure, people, experience great performance. People experience a very high positive mindset. So, you may be looking out at, in my own case, playing an All Ireland final in front of 82,000. That can be an absolutely energizing, adrenaline fueled, exciting, challenging environment to be in. And you kind of get into that flow state and that absorption phase. And it's really, really exciting to be in that moment, challenging and competing and seeing where your potential is at. So high pressure is not a bad thing. High stress is not a bad thing. It can create many great opportunities for us, and it can help us to explore our potential. And also, it's important to have low pressure situations in the course of our day and week as well, where, we're in that recovery zone and we're in a positive mindset. We're just doing nothing and we're happy doing nothing and we're kind of carefree. We're loose with our schedule or loose with our timing, and we're relaxing and doing maybe low intensity, low exertion stuff. And that can be meditation, it can be reading, it can be gardening, it can be just chatting and having a cup of tea, or it can be listening to the radio, whatever it is for people. And then, people can be in a low pressure situation and have a kind of negative mindset where they're maybe in a burnout zone. And this has happened to plenty of people, both in a sports setting or work setting over, their course of their life, where maybe they have had different stressors at work that have been consistent maybe for a couple of weeks on end or a couple of months on end, and they've probably activated too much adrenaline, too much cortisol, and haven't allowed themselves to recover from that mental and physical fatigue. And on their days off and on their time away from work, because they haven't, had good recovery routines in place, they haven't been able to detach themselves from work, and they're mentally always switched on, and physically their system is always switched on to it as well. And they might feel exhausted, empty, a sense of sadness, maybe disengaged and hopeless from themselves in general life. And that for people at different times if we're not, aware of the signals around maybe overworking or putting ourselves in too many pressure situations at once. And then we can also be in a high pressure situation and move into a survival zone where we maybe get defensive of our status, defensive of our opinion. Maybe we're fearful of trying things. Maybe we get anxious around the situation that's there or how we're going to be received, and it creates a lot of worry. Other kind of emotions we may have, maybe impatience, we're a bit irritable, we're a bit frustrated, we're a bit angry. So I'd like to maybe to have a look at that graph and say, over the last couple of months, if I was to come up above myself for a moment and just kind of reflect on my own kind of situations in life and activities, and what would be the activities that put me into, a high pressure positive mindset, a low pressure positive mindset, I'm in the recovery zone. Is there some situations or activities that have triggered that kind of burnout zone for me? And is there some situations or people or behaviors I've kind of been leaning towards that have led to me being in the survival zone? So just kind of look at those words, look at those areas, and just kind of highlight your week, maybe highlight your month, and say, where am I in a positive, I suppose, mindset and in a high pressure zone and a high great performance zone? Where am I in a positive mindset? I'm in the recovery zone. And that could be walking in nature, it could be listening to music, it could be playing with the kids, whatever it is for you. And then it's try looking at maybe situations and activities that are putting me maybe into exhaustion, maybe a sense of emptiness. And what am I doing there that's maybe causing that? And what are the situations that trigger a sense of defensiveness, maybe, or anxiousness or irritation? And all I'm doing is just trying to understand my own kind of makeup and my own triggers at the moment and putting an awareness to them. So just kind of give yourself a couple of minutes to reflect on your week and your months and maybe what helps around these zones and what doesn't help. And none of these emotions are bad, they're just information. And no one goes around completely happy all the time, no one goes around completely sad all the time. We move through emotion because emotion is just energy in motion. So there might be some mornings where you wake up enthusiastic, there might be some mornings you just wake up exhausted and empty. What might be triggering that the day or two before that? What might be the thought that you're having around the situation that's coming up maybe in the future that's triggering that? So just see, can we notice maybe some patterns around our emotions and maybe situations that are triggering it? And I'd like you to think now and just have a look at your graph. And if you were looking at this from a helicopter and it was a friend's graph, what advice would you give them if they were to make one change? What area would they make the change in? And what would it look like on a daily basis? So what would the new behavior look like that you'd behave your way towards a more positive mindset, more positive pressure maybe? So if you're advising a close friend or a family member, looking at the graph, what would be one change you'd consistently make to behave a new way in the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks, till you start to move into a more positive mindset in your recovery zone or your great performance zone? Just see a message in the chat. How do you know which zone you need to move to first? Okay, thank you. So I would think the orientation would be, Helen, to be as much as possible spending, recovery zone, low pressure with a positive mindset. And, what percentage of my week do I spend here? And then from a great performance zone where maybe different activities give me this sense of healthy pressure, both in a work context or some of my hobbies where I feel, an appropriate level of challenge. I feel confident in my abilities to execute that challenge. I'm optimistic about the result of that challenge and I'm enthusiastic towards it. And it takes a good level of kind of engagement and focus in my daily habits and my daily routine to achieve it. And then, if I'm trying to move into a more carefree and peaceful and relaxed recovery zone where my mindset is positive and I'm in a low pressure, it might be looking at what are the activities there that give me that sense of peace. So on my down days, where do I like to visit that I feel peaceful and at ease? So for me, it's often the sea walking in nature in the woods helps my central nervous system to de-stress and deactivate from the pressures of modern society, both technology and the work environments that we're in a lot of the time. And I find meditation, cooking, listening to music, listening to podcasts is another kind of low pressure, good recovery zone for me, where kind of helps around that. So, it's probably just recognizing maybe what are the triggers for me that I feel kind of in that survival zone around a work context or, a situation, and how can I maybe limit my exposure to that, or maybe look at it in a different way, that it's not something I need to be fearful of. So when we move through the workshop, hopefully you'll have a few more ideas around building these great performance zones for yourself and recovery zones. So, one of the theories around the science of well-being is a thing called the G.I. Joe fallacy, where we've kind of been told this belief from a long way back that knowing is half the battle. So as I mentioned at the outline, we know how many hours we should be sleeping, somewhere between 7 and 8, and probably somewhere between 9 and 10 for younger kids. But very often we, deprive ourselves of sleep to 4 and 5 hours and think this is healthy, even though, we get a sleep deficit then maybe at 2 or 3 hours, and we stack that every night for a week. It's 21 hours of a deficit, which is like nearly 3 nights sleep. People can't tell me that knowing is half the battle then, if that's the case. You're depriving yourself of nearly, 3 nights sleep during the week. And I know people have kids and stuff like that, but it is a big challenge, and it has an impact on your decision making, your choices, your health and well-being. So, knowing is not half the battle. Actually, knowing and doing are two opposite spectrums, and that's where we need to understand how we change behaviors around this. Now, our perception of things also can be quite faulty in our intuition. So, if we look at this graph here, is A bigger than B? Is B bigger than A? If we were to throw an old guess into the chat box there, what do people feel would be an answer? Same size. So you're correct. So, but sometimes there's an optical illusion there, where sometimes we feel, looking out with the two arrows pointing a different direction, my perception looking at that first off was probably B was bigger, but in the course we learned that they were exact same size. But sometimes our visual perception can tell us faulty truths, and it's important maybe to challenge that, and what do we kind of accept as truth and maybe is not. And as I mentioned, G.I. Joe, like knowing isn't half the battle. Sometimes we need to maybe be curious and search for other information. So what do we think maybe makes us happy? Perception might be that money is the thing that will make us happy in life, and once we have enough of that, we'll be, really content and happy with ourselves. And a lot of the studies in America found that when people reach a certain threshold, in America it was $75,000 a year, where they felt they had, enough money for security and safety, providing food and clothes for their kids, and enough kind of disposable income then to treat themselves to whatever, that their level of happiness didn't rise if they went to 100,000 on their salary or 150,000. So money definitely doesn't increase our level of happiness through our lives, but it does give us access to things that, can provide us with extra happiness. A good job isn't going to just increase our happiness on a scale throughout our lives. It's the interpretation and the meaning of that job to us is the thing that will increase our happiness. true love, when we find true love, we might think that that's going to be the fix to feeling happy. But it's found again, once we get married or once we're in a relationship, there has to be a level of work from both partners to increase that level of happiness and that experience together. And then we might have a perception that when we get perfect grades in college or whatever exams we're doing, that I'd be happy when I reach that point. And then we discover when we get the perfect grades that God, it only guarantees me access to my second year in college, or it only gives me a degree that allows me to get promotion and a job when the real work starts. And then, when you really train really hard and you think that when I'm really fit and my body looks the way I want it to look, that I'll have an unbelievable level of confidence, an unbelievable level of happiness. And it's not really shown that this happens. So, having cool things as well might be thing that people think will, deliver that level of happiness for me. And we'll show later on that that may not be the case. And our genes and circumstances aren't definitely not down to our overall happiness. And this is only a small percentage of it, as we found out earlier on. So our gene expression and some of our genes can definitely be changed through epigenetics and neuroscience, as we'll discover later on. So what are some of the annoying features of our mind at the moment that maybe cause us to deprive ourselves of happiness in the moment and maybe achieving greater levels of happiness? So first thing is, our mind's intuitions are usually wrong. How do I know this? When we looked at some of the studies from the course, what do we think that, when I kind of qualify in college, I think I'm going to be way more happier after getting the qualification than I think I'm going to be. When I get married, I think I'm going to be the happiest I've ever been in my life. And then when I arrived there, it wasn't as high or fulfilling as I thought. When I was involved in teams that won All Irelands, we think that happiness maybe is going to last for a lifetime. And then it happens, and Monday or Tuesday after All Ireland, people are maybe still kind of happy around it. Then Thursday or Friday are heading back to work, and reality hits at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, maybe 4 or 5 days after an All Ireland final, that life must go on and the show must go on, and you're going to have to cultivate newer experiences to experience that kind of joy and high again. So when we get our degree in college, we know that maybe that just allows us to apply for a new job, and the work really starts. And oftentimes when we get our degree in college, we're back into work the day or two after it, and that level of high of achievement has probably passed as well. So the perception maybe of how happy we feel from achieving a goal is probably a good distance away from the actual experience itself and the joy of that. And then the second piece is that our mind tends to think in terms of absolutes. So our minds judge to relevant reference points. So we're always kind of basing our standards off other people maybe. And, if I have their house or their car, well, then I probably will be happy. If I get promotion to his level or her level, well, then I'm going to feel very happy. And it's funny, when they looked at this, they saw kind of a study on the Olympic winners and the difference between first, second, and third, and who felt the most happiness. So it was actually interesting to note that the person who finished in a bronze medal was far happier than the person that finished second, because the person that finished second is kind of thinking, God, if I didn't do this in the last 3 or 4 years, I was only a couple of seconds off getting the gold medal. And in the moment, they're nearly taking the joy of winning second and becoming second best in the world. Well, the person in bronze is probably orientating towards, I'm after beating 50 other people in the field, and I'm so glad I didn't finish fourth. And it's just fantastic to get a medal, and their happiness is gone through the roof. So we all have reference points, whether it's around salary, whether it's around job, whether it's around house, whether it's around our car. And we all have reference points maybe that we're consciously and unconsciously aware of. So it's important to check those reference points, and we'll show you how to do that later on. And we don't actually realize that our minds are built then to get used to stuff, which is a bit silly. So if I'm meeting, Peter, or I'm meeting Declan for a coffee and a chocolate cake on a Tuesday morning, and I suggest them that we go for that coffee and cake on a Wednesday morning, and on Thursday morning again, and Friday morning again. Well, the first day that chocolate cake and the lovely coffee hits that kind of taste bud, and you get that dopamine hit, and you're feeling very relaxed and very calm. Chocolate cake tastes lovely, and the second or third day you're going to eat that chocolate cake, you're probably not able to finish half of it, and by the fourth day you're not even looking forward to a spoon of it. So we kind of adapt to those experiences, and it's really important to realize that and try and make changes to that in the future. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail soon. So they're just some of the kind of annoying features of our mind, and we call them, I suppose, cognitive biases that maybe we're unaware of, and there's loads of them, I suppose, out there, and it's just kind of highlighting them and bringing them to our attention. So how can we kind of overcome these cognitive biases and maybe negativity biases as well? Is the important thing is that there's nothing wrong with pursuing money and wanting some wealth, but you get far greater, I suppose, enjoyment and happiness from investing in experiences rather than the watch or the phone or the car or the house, etc. After buying a new car, maybe you enjoy the experience for a day or two or a week or two, and then after a while it wears off. Whereas you invest in experiences with people where maybe you go on a holiday together, you go away weekend away, that memory, that emotional memory stays a lot longer, and it's something you've shared with someone and you speak about continuously over the course of your life. So doing activities, whether it's physical activities or eating out together or sharing different experiences together, has a far more increase on our well-being and happiness than just investing in material stuff. And the second part then, that investing in flow experiences in our career and our leisure time is a really important way to overcome our biases. So how can I maybe do that? I'm going to go into a bit more detail around that. So the first thing, I suppose, people who have been on the course for the first 3 sessions, we would have done a very important exercise called the character strengths test, and it's in that Seligman email I'm going to be sending after this, and we can actually test out and check what our character strengths are as people. And these character strengths have a huge correlation with, I suppose, achieving more meaning and flow in our work experience, creating more positive emotions when we dial in and use these character strengths on a daily basis, which then increases our well-being. Also, when we start to spot character strengths in ourselves and others, we increase our relationship connection with them, and we have stronger and more intimate relationships. And also, by reflecting on these character strengths on a daily basis, we're increasing our confidence and our sense of achievement and self-esteem. So the important things around these character strengths is the usage, and also reflecting on the positive experiences both in a work, personal and professional context, and sharing them with others, and also how we view our career. I hate to use the word work, so I always say, it's our career, it's our craft, and it's something that's kind of a calling for us, that we're doing it to serve a higher purpose, be it adding value to a company, adding value to society, adding value to customers or clients. And if we can kind of view our career as a calling and add that kind of context to it, it can increase that sense of character strength and that usage, and also improve our overall happiness. So that's a really important test. And when we can use 3 out of 5 of these character strengths in a work context or a personal context on a daily basis, we're really increasing our sense of confidence, connectedness, positive emotions, and well-being in each experience. And it's been intentional around those character strengths and signature strengths, and spotting them in ourselves and spotting them in others and reflecting on them. The other key part then is to look at the flow state and how maybe could we generate this for ourselves on a more consistent basis, both in our personal pursuits and our professional pursuits. So flow is about really, looking at getting a level of challenge in maybe a work or sports context where, I identify projects that are probably, somewhere between 1 to 5% above my current capability. And, what's the skills that I need to maybe dial up and that are 1 to 5% above my current skill set. And it's kind of bordering on, a sense of maybe anxiousness and concern, and kind of hitting that sweet spot between boredom and anxiety. And it's that kind of in between where I know I have the skill set to deliver on it. I know I have the capability and my skills to do it. And I know I'm in control of a lot of aspects of it. And if I perform at a really high level, I know I can get this expected outcome. So take, for example, you're running a 5K and you know your best time is 20 minutes in that 5K. And you want to maybe push yourself to a 5% or a 1% better where, in 8 weeks' time, you want to run a 1950 maybe, for instance. So you have a clear goal of that kind of outcome and maybe your 8-week training plan and what you want to feel like during it and afterwards. And it's kind of on that lovely edge of challenge and skill. And you're going to get feedback, at the end of the 8 weeks, whether you're hitting that, you're going to get feedback in your training, how close you are to that evolution. So kind of focusing on things that you're very good at, both in your career and both in hobbies and pursuits, kind of a domain, whether it's in sport or whatever it is for you. It could be playing the guitar, it could be cooking, it could be something musical or something creative. And you're just challenging yourself outside your current limit and pushing yourselves outside that. So focusing on something you're really good at and have an interest and passion for, and number two, that it is challenging to you above your current skill set or your current capability. So it's just important to kind of understand what gets us into that flow state. The next piece we're going to look at then is, how does it actually feel? I've been lucky enough, I suppose, to be in a lot of challenging circumstances, both professionally and personally. And, when you get into this kind of access of flow state, for me in Croke Park, playing in front of 82,000, it's a beautiful place to be where you have no concern for the past and you're just completely absorbed in the present moment and time almost slows down for you. The puck out or the high ball is coming to you and all you're thinking about is grabbing that ball and driving forward for it. And you can almost feel like an outer body experience, grabbing it, breaking tackles, and you're just absorbed in the doing and absorbed in the motion of that. And you can maybe take in some of the noises and surrounds of 82,000 as you do that, but it's just completely, a lovely level of challenge, a lovely level of skill challenge in it also, but you're just absorbed and engaged in that flow and moment. So it's trying to find those sweet spots, on a daily and weekly basis where you're completely absorbed and curious about it. There's a sense of out of everyday reality. You're losing maybe a concept of time. Things maybe seem to slow down or speed up for you, and you're just kind of maybe lost an hour or 2 or 3 hours doing it. And there's great kind of inner clarity of the steps that you need to take and how you're going to go about it. And you have a feeling of confidence and control that I can do this when I'm really on it and really engaged in it. And there's almost like you have no care in the world about what's happening later on or what happened before. This is the only moment that you're concerned about, and you're in love in that process and engaged in it. And it's, that intrinsic motivation where there's a real stimulation, a real sense of achievement and mastery of the task that you're doing. So that's kind of a feeling kind of effect that you might get from those moments in a work context or a personal context. So how can I go about achieving it? It's about setting very clear goals for yourself. What is the challenge that you want to go after? What is your kind of current skill level around that? What would be the skills you need to call up on, and what would an outcome look like from that challenge? And then you have to look at bringing a high level of concentration to it. So if it was a work context, you'd be blocking off maybe 45 minutes of an hour to get really focused in on your goals and the process around that. If it's a sports context, you're setting up a challenge on the pitch maybe where you want to get 5 shots off in under 10 seconds from 60 meters, and you really know that you're going to get a feedback on this fairly quickly, and you've got to have your scoring percentage at a certain level, maybe 80 or 90%, that's above your current level. There's almost a loss of self-consciousness. So you're just absorbed in the one task, the one moment mentality. You know, you forget where you are almost, you forget the sense of time. You know, there's direct and immediate feedback. You know, did I execute that task goal? Did I execute that process? And did people understand what I was doing and delivering on? So, you know, for me in a work context, it's, you know, for a presentation, what do I want to deliver on it? What would that look like from a content and material point of view? And how would I deliver it? And I rehearse it from that kind of feedback point of view. And then you're just trying to get that sweet spot, you know, kind of understanding what your current ability or skill set is and what would be kind of a challenging number above that or a challenging percentage, and how quickly can I do it, or what level of effort do I need to put into it to get a level of discomfort and a bit of unease while I'm doing it. And it's important then that I have a sense of control, that I feel I can do this if I perform it, you know, somewhere near my maximum or somewhere above my maximum. And what's the reward then, both internally and intrinsically for doing it? What's the feelings I want to have? What's maybe the extrinsic rewards of an achievement I want to have, both, you know, for delivering that project or to a certain level. And then there's also maybe a lack of awareness of the bodily needs that are concerned, that you're not too focused on technique or the process of going about it, you're just absorbed in the doing. And there's complete absorption, and you know, we kind of nearly have to start to train ourselves to be away from email in a work context, be away from books and phones maybe that are drawing our attention, and we're using all our mental faculties to become absorbed in it. So these are some of the components of achieving that flow state. So a very interesting study by this guy Kotler around adventure sports, and you know, Google have brought this in where, you know, I know there's a lot of things in the graph here for a moment, but I'll explain it later. So Google have brought in a program where for somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks, they train people up on using these simple triggers, between 4 to 6 of them. And they found over a 50 to 80% increase in their productivity in work. Another study by McKinsey looked at 5,000 executives, and they found that the executives they trained up on having 4 to 6 simple triggers to access the flow state had somewhere in the region of 2 to 5 times the increase in their productivity. So the top organizations are putting time into understanding flow state and how to access it. So just looking at this graph, it's on the left-hand side, if it's an individual project or an individual sport that you're doing. On the right-hand side, it's around working with a team and maybe a team project. So, you know, trying to find a thing that you're passionate about that is a high level of purpose for you. So why you're doing it has really explored for you. There's an element of risk and reward in it. So if I don't get this right, there's a kind of a consequence, and you know, that kind of spike in my curiosity and interest. There's a certain novelty to it. So like the 5 kilometer run, you know, I've never broken 1950. I've never done this route, and I'm excited to explore, can I break that time? There's a certain complexity to it that, you know, if I go this route, what's my strategy around it? And I have to kind of think out how I'm going to run up the hill and how I'm going to recover in this phase of the race. There's a certain unpredictability, as in, you know, can I achieve that outcome or not? What is the best process and strategy of doing that? And, you know, I have to kind of feel my way through it and feel my way through that process. There's going to be a kind of a deep embodiment of myself and all my mental and physical faculties. You know, whether I got that time in that 5K, you know, I get immediate feedback on it. And I have very clear goals and processes for each kilometer of how I'm going to go about that. And it's somewhere above my current threshold around the level of challenge I've experienced before and a skill set that I've used before, but maybe not at this standard. So pushing yourself into a new level of maybe discomfort and unease. And, there's a certain level of pattern recognition around, I've done this before, and my creative brain kind of knows how to solve the solutions around it. Not fully, but I know how to get from A to B to C. And then if I was working in a group context, it would look like, people are listening closely to the task. They're sharing maybe individual goals and how we can move the task from A to B. There's a shared ownership that if this doesn't come off, we're all going to have to maybe report back on how it underperformed, and we all have an important contribution to that. And we're kind of like listening in and saying, yes, and what else do we need to do to, get closer to our goal at a quicker time, and how else can we use our resources? There's complete concentration as a team and a shared effort around that. And people have an autonomy and a sense of control that this is what we're doing. We want to move from A to B, but your choice of how you get to B is totally up to you, and how you design that and create that and develop that. And there's almost a synergy around people's egos where we're given over to a higher cause, a higher purpose. There's familiarity of maybe the people we're working with, and there's a high trust factor around, I've seen their skill set and their strengths and how they could add to us achieving this goal. And people feel their opinions are shared, and there's an equal participation around effort and opinions and ideas, and we're sharing the load among each other. And there's very open and honest communication on the project around some of the deficits we're having, some of the weaknesses we're having, some of the things we're doing well, and how we maybe can move things on a bit quicker. So I'd like you to just reflect on that graph, and for you, if it's more around group bases that you want to look at, or maybe around an individual challenge that you have, what would be the 4 to 6 triggers that would stand out for you, that if I could line these up, that would bring me closer to that flow experience on a daily basis, both in a personal context or a professional context? And I just rehearse and practice them and become aware of them. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that, a couple of minutes to do that exercise. So the 4 to 6 triggers that stand out for you and you feel would help you to access that flow state. So like if one of your triggers is passion, what are the things that maybe trigger your passion, the activities, the hobbies, and you're kind of seeking out those things on a more regular basis, on a weekly basis? What could be a level of novelty I could bring in around that uh, hobby that I have? So if it's running, if it's sport, if it's presenting in work, how could I maybe add a bit of novelty to my presentation or my projects? What kind of immediate feedback could I put in at different sections of the challenge or the situation that I'm in? What are the current skills I'm using in that, and maybe how could I stretch them another bit and challenge them another bit? And if I was working on a group project in work, what are the 4 to 6 triggers that were maybe accessing sometimes in work projects, but maybe we could get a bit more consistent on? and how could we maybe ensure that we're using those little triggers to create that process and that flow process for the group and that group flow state. We're absorbed in the task and maybe we lose 2 or 3 hours. So just building on that now, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And we're going to look at a couple of other elements around flow state. So I'd like you to kind of look at again some common things that you do during the week, some common activities. And I'd like you to look at what are the things maybe that are a high level of challenge for me and create that high arousal or that high activation for me. What are some of the things that cause that flow state for me and that control state for me and that relaxation state? So start to maybe plot some of the activities you do, watching telly, eating breakfast, preparing meals, driving, preparing work presentations, maybe physical exercise or sports you do. What would be the kind of common activities to have during the week and where would you put them on each of these areas of the graph? Now that you have an idea of what flow feels like and some of the triggers around it and how we access it, reflect back on some of the projects you have in work on a daily basis and where you're close to that zone. Maybe some of the challenges at home that maybe create a sense of flow and absorption for you. Maybe some of your hobbies, maybe it's music, art, cooking, home improvements. And maybe some outdoor pursuits when you reflect back on the last 6 months that have maybe created some of that flow experience for you. And we're really lucky at the moment that I suppose the world has kind of opened up to a university for all of us, where we probably have access online to learning anything we want in the world, be it a language, an instrument, learning programming, learning about technology. We can probably access any course or any expert in their field now, on YouTube or through universities or whatever forum. And it's amazing, how quickly we can develop skills in different areas and maybe access flow state through learning as well. So just thinking of that open university and maybe what would you like to develop more flow states? And maybe you have a couple of things there that are in the arousal or in the control zone. So in the control zone, there might be a few activities. How could you maybe increase the level of difficulty or complexity there that would move you into a small bit above your ability? And for maybe things that are slightly above flow state and in arousal, how could you maybe lower the level of challenge and bring yourself into flow state slightly? Just give you another couple of moments to reflect there and plot any other activities you have in the week. And And then we're just going to do a general reflection on accessing the flow state and maybe where it shows up in your personal and professional life. So again, it's about maybe doing the things you love, the things that you're passionate about. So question one there is maybe defining your expertise. What are your personal strengths now when you reflect back in your life, and some of the character strengths you have, some of the communication skills you might have, your planning and organization, maybe your ability to connect with people, your ability to be optimistic or adaptable. What are some of your personal strengths? And what are your main fields of interest, if there is one or two or three? And what are you looking to become, a master or expert level at? And for some of us on the call, you might have studied things like Anders Ericsson, 10,000 hours. When you think about that, that's only maybe 2.5 hours a day for a set number of years. So we can maybe achieve that a lot quicker than we think. And maybe some of us have been studying areas since we're 13 or 14, and we're already in that master or expert phase. And master or expert phase is probably shortened even more for people with the access to technology and able to, I suppose, listen to the great minds in the world at the moment around different areas of performance and success and well-being, etc. And able to do courses and increase our knowledge of those things. So what would you like to be a master at, at the moment, or maybe in the next couple of years for yourself? And then it's maybe to look at a work context. If you're fortunate enough to be working at the moment, what areas of your work are challenging and maybe not challenging? And, could we maybe look at speaking to someone in our team, or maybe we have a manager above us, about how we can maybe move from that control zone or boredom zone and maybe increase the level of challenge for ourselves to access that flow state. And away from work, sometimes the best recovery routines can be ones that are challenging, that take up all our mental and physical faculties, and we come away from it absorbed and engaged. You think of a Saturday morning, maybe when you're tired and you decide to go out for a run in nature or go for a hike for 2 or 3 hours, and you come home from that different level of exhaustion, but you feel a sense of achievement and aliveness doing it. So sometimes, sitting down for 4 or 5 hours watching TV and not remembering any of it isn't a great way to regenerate ourselves and regenerate our energy. So it's trying to look at maybe outside of my work context, what are the things that make me feel most alive, and I would pursue on a more consistent basis. And from doing our previous graph then, so what are the things, the activities, the situations that trigger me into that flow state, and how can I maybe block off that time in my own personal agenda every week? So for me, I love to, make sure I've no technology for a couple of blocks a week of maybe an hour and a half, where if I'm presenting to a corporate team or presenting to a school or a sports team, that I have maybe 90-minute blocks of real preparation where I'm just absorbed in developing the key ideas and insights around that and putting it together in a presentation. And there'll be immediate feedback of whether that's done or not and what it looks like. And then post the workshop, then you're obviously going to get feedback from people as well, whether it achieved what it set out to do. So it's trying to find blocks in the week where you can maybe bring all your mental and physical faculties to, an activity, and try to access that flow state and using some of those triggers that we mentioned. So I'll just give you a couple of more minutes to, I suppose, kind of clarify your action plan around flow state and challenge. And if any questions have kind of triggered for you during that, feel free to pop them in the chat box. If I don't spot them, I'll definitely answer them at the end of the workshop. Okay, moving on to, I suppose, the rewiring side of our brain and resetting those, I suppose, faulty reference points we have, and those adaptations that thwart our happiness. So, it's an important section. You know, now we know from neuroplasticity that, if I have a habit and a neuron fires and that neuron fires with another neuron and they start to link up and connect, neurons that fire together wire together. And the more I behave that way, or the more I think that way, those neurons get stronger and stronger, and they get wrapped with a thing called myelin, which is like insulation. But the great thing is that we can also override or overrule those, faulty habits we have, or those faulty thinking patterns, by learning a new behavior to override it, or learning a new way of thinking to override it. So we can break that neural network or that neural pathway through repetition and quality of practice around those new habits that we want to obtain. So we're going to look at maybe how we can help generate that for ourselves. So how do we reset our, I suppose, our reference points, our faulty patterns? So if we concretely re-experience, for example, on a daily basis, there might be someone in your team who's referenced that the job is horrible, the job is tough, I hate all aspects of it. And, for me, work at different times can be challenging, but when I think back to really working, it's probably when I was 16, 17, 18, and, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe tying steel and pouring concrete, and getting home at maybe 6:30 or 7 in the evening after carrying scaffolding, putting up scaffolding, sweeping out dirty houses, gutting out dirty houses. And that for me was probably work. After that, I started college, and, you go into an apprenticeship in a nice office with a coffee machine. You get donuts and sandwiches maybe every Friday, and there's a lot of comfort in it. So, our careers and work are probably two distinct things for me that, sometimes we need to go back and, look at these things and say, I am quite fortunate the work environment I'm in and some of the benefits of it. And if we can go back and kind of re-experience our worst job, it can orientate us to resetting our patterns for what we're grateful for and positive around our current job experience. The second thing is to concretely observe. So, if you drove into maybe the toughest or rural parts of Galway or Limerick or Dublin, and you're maybe feeling sorry about where you're living, or maybe a job you need to do in your own house, it'd fairly shock you into some of the conditions that people may be living and are struggling with. Syringes and needles maybe on their doorstep, crime and graffiti, maybe a lack of running water, clean clothes, maybe broken windows in their house, maybe some people living homeless or in dilapidated apartments or houses. So sometimes you maybe concretely need to observe these situations and observe what maybe homeless people are going through to reset our patterns around what we think we're unhappy about. The third thing then is maybe to start recognizing when you're online and you're making social comparisons about yourself and about others. And it's about what we mentioned last workshop around practicing non-judgment. And we all have mind filters where we kind of rate things as good, bad, or neutral. And it's to try and maybe catch these experiences and stop our consumption of these comparisons. And, when we're noticing this happening, is to imagine a stop sign and just interrupt that thinking pattern and change our attention to some other activity or some other way of thinking and orientating towards that. The fourth, I suppose, tip or hint around resetting our patterns is, as I mentioned, if I was meeting Peter for the coffee and cake 4 or 5 times in a row, I'm not getting enjoyment by the fourth or fifth day, and I don't want to eat that cake or drink that coffee. So if I know a hobby that I really enjoy, and it could be, for me at the moment, I used to swim in the sea 4 or 5 times a week. I've started to maybe interrupt that consumption a bit and just do it on a Saturday or Sunday morning. And I found I've really, really enjoyed just the once a week. So I've often found working with teams that sometimes we get into a pattern of training the same night and doing the same thing 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and players start to enjoy it less. So when you change up the training environment or do something completely different, like a yoga class or a game of soccer, when we come back to our sport, you can enjoy it a lot more. Or even taking 3 or 4 days off work or taking a long weekend from work, when you come back to it, you start to enjoy actually coming back into the routine. And it's a bit like the Christmas break, maybe for 2.5 weeks. We actually maybe crave in a lot of cases getting back into the routine and eating properly again and sleeping properly. So sometimes interrupting our consumption for something we really enjoy can be a great way to reset our patterns and our appetite towards it. And then again, the important thing is to maybe increase the variety of the type of training we do, or the type of projects that we're on, or the types of food we eat, that when we come back to that, we kind of enjoy it as a new experience again, or a first time experience. And we have to challenge our taste buds both from a food point of view and from, our reset mental patterns as well. So a variety of tasks and variety of experiences and variety of people are really good ways of resetting those faulty cognitive biases that we all have. The next piece then is having better wants. So rather than just wanting loads of money or wanting a good job and realizing that that's not going to increase our level of happiness through our life, it's identifying what that good job is, and could I use some of those character or signature strengths in it, and could I frame it as a calling, and is there a decent level of challenge in my career that would create that flow state, and again, looking at money as something that creates opportunity for my family, maybe, and how can I share experiences with them through education, through holidays, through trips, through food, and sharing those experiences with others is far more important than the accumulation of money and our increase in happiness. For students in your family or for ourselves, if we're going back learning, it's again that growth mindset, and not focused on getting the degree or the result. It's important to have an outcome in mind and an overview of that outcome and what it would feel like. But again, it's just enjoying the journey. For me, working with sports teams, trying to win an All Ireland final, we don't talk about winning All Ireland final maybe till we get there. It might be the first conversation in the year, but it's about enjoying the journey and the shared experience together, the shared struggles, the shared laughs, the challenges, working hard, seeing the progress, falling back down, seeing the progress again. And for me, that was always the most enjoyable part of being on the actual journey rather than the end destination. And sometimes not having a destination at all is actually a good thing, and just enjoying the daily pursuit and the daily enjoyment of learning something new, of mastering skills, of just the feeling of doing it well, that intrinsic motivation. So, getting good grades won't increase our happiness. It's probably the experience in that journey of meeting new people in the class, learning new things about ourselves, learning about new things in new areas, and it's trying to focus on that intrinsic motivation. The importance of reaching out to people and having random acts of kindness. So, things like sending a thank you note or a gratitude letter to people in our life that have influenced or helped us, not only creates positive emotions and memories in ourselves, but also influences their emotional memory and memory load. So that can be a great way to boost not only our own positive mental health, but also others, and fill our emotional bucket. And the other part then is around social connection. When we share experiences with others, when we share things that are difficult for us or causing concern for us, we have a heart connection with that person. We increase the level of oxytocin in our system, which means we feel relatable to people, we feel connected with them. And that also improves our immune system and strengthens our immune system when we produce that. So social connection, random acts of kindness are really important ways to build that positive emotional bucket and increase it. And the other part then is how people kind of view time. So when I'm putting time into work, we're probably, in a kind of a stress state where, that my time has gone there, I'm doing this work thing. But when we can actually see that as, a choice, and we see other social connections we have outside of work as a choice, we can nearly see it as time affluent. And people who view that time as affluent time are 5 times more happier. So making social connections in our free time, Having shared experiences with people in our free time or downtime is a great way to increase that emotional bucket. And the fifth part then is around mind control. So in the research from the course that I did, it was found that people who allowed their mind to wander maybe too often and too regularly kind of went into maybe a pattern where negativity bias took over and we're thinking about negative experiences or we're having negative thinking cycles. So it's important to catch maybe that mind wandering and bring ourselves back to the present moment and be engaged in the interaction we're having right now or the task we're having right now. And meditation and mindfulness will be a great way of doing that. So probably 50% of the time, our mind is wandering during this conversation, during this phone call, and then every so often we have to bring ourselves back to the task, the person that's speaking, and making eye contact with them and be absorbed in what we're doing. 95% of the time we're on autopilot, and every so often we come back into that 5% consciousness, and we need certain things to spike that and generate us. And when we're able to catch ourselves drifting and bring ourselves back, we're really in control then of the situation and present moment and high performance. So how do we maybe rewire our brains then? I mentioned the signature strengths there and having a real intentional, diary focus around it. So these are my top 5 strengths. These is how I bring them into my work experience, and I write down the actions and activities around that. Our gratitude practice every day, and I would say this has been a game changer for me the last 12 months. And why do I actually say that? I suppose at the start of the lockdown last March, I would had a lot of business projects signed up and sealed for the year, and within a couple of months in a sports situation, in a corporate setting, business was suspended, and I probably lost 80% of those projects overnight. And I had to really kind of hone in on, I have my health, I have a lovely home, I have a lovely family, lovely supportive environment, and there's still access to doing new things, even though these clients are gone for now. And maybe took me 6 or 8 weeks to reorientate my mindset and my thinking around that. I was lost for a couple of weeks, hoping that they'd come back, hoping the restrictions would be lifted, hoping that they'd call me any day to start working again. And 8 or 9 months, 10 months later, some of those projects just haven't come back. So gratitude was a great thing for me to start practicing every day, to focus on the positive things that are in my life right now: the home environment, the food, the ability to be healthy, the ability to, stay warm, stay safe, to isolate. All these things we can focus in on. And I'd access to so many more clients now through the online forum, and that's just become more acceptable. So, gratitude has been a huge part to, I suppose, help with my underlying anxiety around the future and maybe what's going to happen with it. And often our mind generates future fears that are perceptions that might never happen, and we generate images and sensations around that and thoughts. So gratitude has been a great grounding exercise for me to just focus on the present moment and what's good in life and increase a higher level of positive emotions. We all have a mind wandering default network, and that can be unhelpful in a lot of situations, both relationships, work contexts. And catching that and using mindfulness techniques is important through the breath or words that redirect us, or simple triggers. Another technique I want to share with you is around savoring. So savoring is where we actually have an experience, be it a nice meal with something or a nice training session or a task in work, and we actually go back into that experience and share it with others. And we give the detail of when it was, where it was, and why it was so important and so nice, and we thank that person for it. And that can bring us back into that state of that good experience and what it was like. I've kind of gone over kindness before and social connection. Exercise, another huge thing for rewiring our brains, producing new brain cells, creating increase in memory, increasing learning capacity, processing of information, also releasing, I suppose, tension. and anxiety from our muscles. And also when we exercise, we increase our self-image and our perception of ourselves. So our confidence increases because maybe we start to tone up and lose weight and we see ourselves in a new light. So that can reset our patterns. And sleep is a really important thing that I've talked on a few times, but that regeneration of cells through sleep. Sometimes we think the hard training session is what improves fitness. It's actually the recovery and in the sleep cycle between 12 and 3 that does all the regeneration. And when we go to sleep after working all day, often when we have a good night's sleep, our brain starts to figure out the solutions to problems that we have, and it makes those connections at night as well. So sleep is another great way to rewire our brains and put some solutions in there and develop those solutions. So that's the end of section 3, I suppose, and hopefully there's some really useful tips for you there around resetting the patterns and using some helpful tools around that. And for some of you may have seen 50% of those things before or 100% of those things before. And don't forget GI Joe, knowing isn't half the battle. It's how can I bring them into intentional practices and actually start doing maybe 3, 4, 5 things that throughout this next 12 months that I've built in maybe 4 to 6 habits that are improving my positive emotions, improving my confidence, improving my health and well-being, and improving my relationships with others. And dialing into those character strengths, dialing into savoring, gratitude, improving sleep habits, improving exercise habits, improving maybe being kind to myself and being kind to others, increasing maybe my social networks and connections, and increasing maybe different experiences from a challenge and healthy pressure point of view. And all these things are kind of free and available to us, and we maybe know them, but it's maybe how can I get intentional around them now and build the better habits. So this section is just going to really share with you around that for the next 5 minutes and give you an idea around that. So what we need to do to build better habits is a thing called situation support. So one of the studies showed that, if you were working as a secretary in an office and you had a bowl of sweets there, and, you're 50% more likely to eat the bowl of sweets than when you have the bowl of sweets 20 meters away. So that's a really important thing, because if you think of it, if you had a fruit bowl at home or you had a bowl of sweets in the center of the kitchen, you're 50% more likely to eat that bowl of sweets if it's right in front of you every single day and you're passing it maybe 50 or 100 times at the moment from working at home. Now, if you have fruit in that bowl and there's strawberries and there's grapes and you're not really in the habit of eating much fruit, slowly by slowly you start to create that habit because you've set up an environment for that to happen. Every day I train in the morning at 6:30, and that didn't happen automatically for me. I had to start to break in some situation support around it. So I probably used to wake up at 8 o'clock, and bit by bit I'd start setting my alarm for 7:45. The following week I'd set it for 7:30. The following week it was 7:15. The following week it was 7 o'clock. And eventually my body clock started getting tireder at a different time every night, started wanting to go to bed a bit early. And now I probably go to bed somewhere between 10 and 10:30 and wake at about 5:45 without no alarm. And what it helps me to train in the morning as well is to have everything set up in the morning around a laptop in my training area and have my clothes directly at my feet when I wake in the morning. So all I have to do is put my feet on the floor in the morning, and subconsciously and autopilot me, I'll start to dress myself and I'll start to walk downstairs. So that's what I mean maybe of situation support and creating an environment for yourself in your home, maybe an exercise setting, or maybe it's a work setting where you want deep focus and a level of challenge, or maybe it's your training regime where you bring in a couple of people around you to support you. So those things around situation support are important, and goal setting is something we'll dive into as well, and the importance of it. So when I write down my goals, 80% of the time I'm more likely to do it when I get very clear on that plan. So what is situation support? Then I've gone through some of these. It's maybe fixing the bad environment at home, Where I've laptop maybe or phone free areas, I start to create fruit bowls. Maybe I put books beside my bed that I'll read at night that are going to improve my mindset or my well-being. Setting up the gear, setting up little cues for sleep, eating and exercise around the home environment, that my gear is nearby, that maybe healthy food is nearby, that exercise equipment is right on my doorstep and I've no excuse maybe, and I'm trying to taken out the level of decision I have to make every day. I reckon we make somewhere in the region of 25 to 30,000 decisions a day. And I think we make something like, over a couple of 600 or 700 on food alone. So we're using up our mental bandwidth by doing that. So if we kind of create the environment, we start to do it automatically. So second thing might be promoting more healthy activities would be if you had a gratitude book area in the house, maybe you have social contacts for classes and you start to make friendships through the classes and writing letters of gratitude for others, maybe on a weekly or daily basis. So if I'm setting goals, and the importance around this is getting a specific goal that I want, and I'm getting to look at it from a very clear outline of what do I want to achieve and what would success look like around that. And I start to use a thing called mental contrasting, where I first involve myself looking at that goal and seeing myself achieving it. So that 5K run and achieving that time and seeing that time on my watch, winning that maybe county championship with my club and what that experience would be like with my parents, my friends, and my family members. Getting that promotion in work, getting that degree in college, and just visualizing getting that certificate in the post or that email with those results, those leaving cert results, those college results, whatever it is for you. And I start to maybe dwell on that positive emotion of that outcome. And then I start to look at, well, what might be the obstacles for me developing that goal that I wanted or developing that achievement. And I start to list maybe 4 or 5 of them, and I start to look at maybe planning a solution around that obstacle. And I start to implement that intention, and I use an if then plan. So, when we put it out there and we say, this is the goal I want to achieve, and I start to write about it and experience it, our subconscious thing called a reticular activating system starts to search our environment for all the clues to help me solve that goal. So when I write it down and make an intention and I start to really experience it and I start to put the process and steps in place, it really helps me to achieve that. And writing about it gives me an 80% chance of achieving it, more likely than not writing about it and not being intentional about it and not activating that reticular activating system and that subconscious autopilot. So the keys to building better habits, here's 4 key tips for you. So plan, think about how many times you will do the habit. Okay, they tell us it might take 66 days to build a habit. Can I do it every day? How many times a day can I do it? How many times a week can I do it? And I start to build that neural pathway consistently and often with it. And the more I do it, the more neural pathways fire that way, and I start to wrap myelin around it and making a new neural pathway in the brain. So having a plan of what the habit looks like, when I'll do it, where I'll do it, who I'll do it with, the time, and getting very specific with it. So if it's an exercise routine, this is the time I'm going to do it. This is what I'm going to do. This is the time I'm going to block into my calendar at it. If it's a bedtime routine, this is the time I'm going to bed, and this is the time I start my bedtime routine. If it's a gratitude practice, when and where, and I start to set up the environment around that. And make sure you commit to telling someone about it, and maybe you partner up and do some similar thing where they have a habit to build and they have to report to you on a daily or weekly basis if they did it, and reflect on that, and you start to commit to that process of change. Designing the environment that I've been through and looking at ways of how we can improve and make a healthy environment. And then it's just trying to see it very much from a growth mindset perspective, that this is learning and progress, and the more I orientate towards that outcome I want to achieve, the more I'm going to learn about myself, the more I'm going to develop my skill set, and more I'm going to change my behavior. And it's going to take time. It's going to be messy at the start. It's going to be a level of incompetence maybe before I kind of reach a level of autopilot and what we call unconscious competence. So, that takes a bit of dedication, it takes a bit of discipline, it takes a plan and specificity and intentionality, and it's about building that orientation that way. So the last piece I'm going to share, which is a thing called the WHOOP method, and it's another goal setting method. I think it's kind of a little cool thing to think of. So if you were to write your wish around what you maybe learned from today, and in 3 or 4 words, what would that be? You know, to experience better health, to experience more gratitude, to experience savoring. What would be your goal or your outcome you'd like to have? And what would that outcome look like in 3 to 4 words? What would that best outcome be if you fulfilled this wish? And it's going into that experience and imagine it for 60 seconds, that best outcome in mind, and you start to create a very clear vision for yourself and get that feeling and sense of achievement. Who was there? Where is it? When is it? And what else kind of comes to mind when you think of that outcome that you want? And then it's looking at the obstacles that we mentioned. You know, some of them might be internal, so self-doubt. I can't do this. I've never done this. This is too hard. And I start to look at some of those faulty beliefs that we've talked about in previous workshops and how to develop more empowering beliefs. And you know, looking at situations that you've done well in the past and some experience you learn from that, and maybe increasing the level of challenge on that task. And reimagine yourself overcoming that obstacle through that mental contrasting. And then what would an overall plan look like to overcome that obstacle, and a new habit that you're going to develop, be it that thought or that feeling or that behavior that you want to really go after. And if that obstacle was myself, or if that obstacle was going to bed too late, then I will carry out this action to clear it up. So there's some methods of really building really specific habits and being very specific and intentional around them. And, you know, being aware of that environment that we create around us can help to orientate changing and knowing to doing, knowing to becoming. And using those goal setting frameworks can be a good way to achieve those wishes, desires, dreams that we all have, and actually, you know, delivering on those achievements and milestones that we want to have in our life. So I'm just going to stop sharing there now, and I'd love to hear any feedback or any questions on anything I presented tonight, and maybe some questions you do have. And again, thanks so much for your engagement.